Welcome to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis, and I'm your host. I want to talk about solar today. I've been having a few conversations with some clients of mine that are considering switching over their home electricity systems to solar. And they wanted to know, hey, is this a good investment for me or not? A very good question. And the answer is it can be, right? But I want you to consider several factors before you even decide to go that route, because there's a lot of things to consider. So I'm not going to make this too technical, talking about kilowatt hours and whatnot, right? Yeah, obviously I'm not an expert in that department, but I wanted to just go over some basic concepts that you should consider before you move forward with the decision to whether or not to go solar. So what are some of the reasons that people consider going solar? I mean, the most obvious reason is some people want to save money, right? So they say, hey, maybe if I go solar, it might be cheaper over time to just get some solar panels and pay less over time. All right, so that's one reason. But sometimes there are other reasons involved that are not necessarily related to money. You know, it depends on the person's values too. A lot of people are very environmentally conscious, for example, and they want to lower their own personal carbon footprint. And they say, hey, a great way of doing that is to buy solar panels and just lessen our carbon footprint on the planet, right? Or a combination of the two. Hopefully you get both, right? Now, regardless of your reasons, a lot of the times I get the questions of the financing aspect. Hey, does this make sense from a money standpoint, right? So let's look at some of the options. The easiest way that I found to think about this is in the same way that you would consider the acquisition of a new purchase of a new car. So think about solar panels the same way you would think about buying a car, right? Acquiring a new car. What are my options? If you have the money, you can buy it outright, right? You can just walk into a dealership, pay for your car, right? Not have to worry about financing, leases, none of that stuff. That's one option. Now, if you do that option, obviously, you have to consider what you're giving up, same as you would, when you're buying a car. It's like, does it make sense? What if I'm being offered a very low interest rate on the financing? Maybe I can invest the money at a higher rate of return, hopefully, and then pay a lesser rate of return on the loan, right? So that's one thing to consider. The other option is if you don't have the money to pay it all outright or don't want to because you don't want to forego any other investment opportunities, is leasing it. So one of the things that you might get offered as part of the option of buying or obtaining these solar panels is to get a lease. And it works the same way as a car lease, except that the terms are usually much longer. So it involves a scheduled payment, usually monthly. The developer installs and owns the solar electric system. You do not own the system. They just install it on your property. And then in return, you as the homeowner, you pay a series of scheduled lease payments to that developer, usually around 15 to 20 years. Now, some people like this option because it's not necessarily as expensive to get into it, just like with a car lease. And also, when you look at it from a maintenance standpoint for the system, right? So you want to clarify who's going to be responsible for the maintenance, but usually that third-party developer is responsible for the maintenance of the system when you do it as a lease. So you want to make sure, though, that when you are considering a lease, you clarify in the contract who is required to maintain or replace parts during the lease of the contract term, right? Most solar leases cover maintenance, but they may not necessarily cover the replacing of equipment, right? So you really want to get clear on that because you don't want to get hit with an unexpected expense, right? And this might help you make that decision. So one thing to consider there. The other option is something that is called a solar power purchase agreement, also known as a PPA. Under a residential power purchase agreement, the solar financing company buys, installs, and maintains the solar electric system on the homeowner's property, kind of like similar to the lease, right? The difference is, though, that the homeowner then purchases the energy generated by the system on a per kilowatt hour basis through a long-term contract at rates that are supposed to be competitive to that which you're paying your current electricity rate, right? So this allows you as the homeowner to use the solar energy on a per kilowatt hour rate and avoiding the upfront cost of purchasing a solar system, right? So this could be another option for you. Now, before you do that, one thing you definitely want to look at very carefully is your electricity bill. And this is something that provider should be able to help you illustrate, like give you some sort of projection, like, okay, here's what you're paying currently to your current electricity company. Here is our per kilowatt hour payments, and here's a projected savings, because you want to make sure that, in fact, you are saving money, because otherwise, why do it if the goal is to save money, right? So definitely you want to ask that contractor to calculate the projected per kilowatt hour rate and the annual savings that they're projecting. There's also something called an escalating rate in some of these agreements. So you should consider, because if that increase goes into effect and it goes higher, then you want to see if you're still saving money at the end, right? And this can work against you too, because if your electricity rates goes down in the future and you switch to a power purchase agreement, then you might miss out on those savings as well. Now, another way that you can do this is you can straight up get a solar loan, finance it just like you would a car. And there's many ways to doing this. You can get, for example, a home equity line of credit. So if you do that, the home equity line of credit is using your home as collateral. So you have to be aware of that. It's kind of like a second mortgage on your house. So you are putting your home at risk by doing that. But typically, as a result, because you're using collateral, you will get a lower rate than you would if you use what they call an unsecured loan, like a personal loan somewhere that doesn't have the asset as a guarantee, right? So that's something else to consider. The home equity loan interest may be tax deductible. So you want to talk to your tax professional about that as well. So that may be a benefit of doing so. Other people might just go out there and just get a personal loan. Some people might consider a 401k loan as well. So there's different options. Sometimes the third-party provider might put you in touch with a financing company that will also assist you with financing. Whichever way you decide to, definitely just compare the options, see the terms, the interest rate, things of that sort, because you want to make sure that you're getting a good bang for your buck, as they say, right? So this is the importance too of working with a financial planner, because these are the types of decisions that you're going to have to make at some point when you're considering these things. So like, how do I choose the right option? Should I lease? Should I buy? Should I do a PPA? If I do decide to finance, what type of financing should I do? Should I go with the financing from the company? Should I do home equity? Should I do 401k, right? There's so many things to consider. So there's definitely some benefit there to speaking to some of those professionals in your life, like your financial planner, your tax professional, and certainly an attorney if you are going to be signing one of these contracts with a solar company, because these are all legally binding documents, right? So you definitely want to consult with your attorney. So now that you have a good idea of the basics as far as how to go about this, whether it's financing, leasing, or doing a purchase power agreement, another thing I wanted to go over is some key terms that you might see in the contract. Usually these are the types of things that you will see specifically addressed in the contract if you decide to buy one of these solar systems. So I just wanted to briefly touch over a few of the most common ones. One of them is a buyout option. Just like when you lease a car, if you are leasing the system, you want to understand the buyout option. And meaning, okay, how much will it cost me that if I decide to buy the system instead of continuing to lease it? You want to know that. So you want to know how the price is being calculated for the buyout. You want to know under what circumstances can you buy out. There are times that prices may vary. The methods of calculating the buyout prices could be different. Also, if you're selling the home, you want to figure out, well, what happens if I sell the home? Can I transfer the ownership of this solar panel and the contract to the new buyer? And if so, how would they qualify for it? Because this may prevent you from selling your home. You might have to buy it out first before you do sell the home. Maybe the buyer is not interested in having solar, so you got to consider these kind of things ahead, not just for yourself currently for your use, but also if there's a likelihood that you might sell a house later. You also want to know the contract term. And by that, I mean the duration, the payback period. You want to know, right, how many years, because you want to compare. Typically, solar panels, probably you might get some, by comparison, like the warranty, 20 to 25 years or something like that. So you want to know, is there a separate warranty that you should consider? How long is the warranty being provided as the standard warranty? Again, continue to think about this like a car, right? What's the standard warranty? Is there an additional warranty that I can buy to cover myself that goes beyond the standard one? It might make sense to do, right? Also, if you decide to purchase the system, right, is it at a pre-designated price of the fair market value of the system at the time? You want to find out these kinds of things. Also, what if you decide that you don't want it at the end of the lease? How do you basically give it back, right? How does the third party arrange for the system removal? You want to know these things ahead of time. Also, what are the credit requirements if you are going to finance or lease? Is there a minimum credit score? What are the third party financing arrangements that they're offering you as well, right? The interest rates, all that related to the terms. Is there a down payment required? You want to know how much out of pocket you have, just like you do when you're buying a car, right? Usually leases have a less of a down payment requirement, right? So that could be a plus on the lease side. But then you have to worry about, not owning the system. If you want to own it, you might want to go with the financing or buying it outright. If you're financing, what is the down payment? One thing to consider with the down payment is sometimes when you put money up front towards the cost of the electric system, you'll likely receive a lower monthly payment, right? Just like you do when you're financing a car. So you want to see if that's an option, right? Because it may make sense. In the case of a purchase power agreement, there's something that I'm going to talk to you about next called an escalation clause. Putting a down payment may get rid of that escalation clause, which may be to your benefit. What the escalation clause is a clause in the contract that increases your monthly payment on an annual basis in order to account for inflation projected at annual increases for the electricity rates. So that's another thing you want to know. You want to ask the provider, is there an escalation clause in my contract? And if so, what is it? So that you know in the future if those payments are going to go up. Also, and again, you're going to be signing legally binding documents. So you definitely want to have an attorney review this, but I just want you to have like a general idea of the concept. Also, I touched on this a little earlier, the home ownership transfer provision. You want to know, in case I sell this home, can I transfer this to the new homeowner? And if so, how would that work, right? What do they need in order to take over the loan and the panels, ownership of the panels? And if not, what do I need to do beforehand, right? Because that could put you in a jam. And you might have to time things out right if you're planning on selling the house. Also, you want to ask them, is there a minimum production guarantee? So a lot of the leases and PPA arrangements offer some sort of production or output guarantee, usually in a certain number of kilowatt hours of electricity produced per year. So you want to know, is there such a guarantee, right? Have them walk you through that because you want to know if that's going to benefit you, right? Because if it's not producing as expected, then it might not really save you much. So you want to know, like, are you going to make up the difference if the system doesn't provide the output? So is there a minimum output guarantee? There's also something called net metering. And usually you might see that referred to as net energy metering. And all that does is it enables the solar system to use the solar electricity generation to offset the electricity consumption. So the meter kind of runs backwards. So if you have electricity that's produced extra by the system, it could be added back to the grid. And in essence, you may end up getting a credit on your electricity bill for that excess electricity that is being produced. So you want to know, is that an option? Operations and maintenance. This is pretty big, right? If you choose a lease or the PPA, the third-party owners own the solar electric system, right? They'll likely cover the operations and the maintenance over the course of the contract, but you want to get that in writing for a fact. You want to know what is covered by them, et cetera. Also, the insurance of the system. You want to know where that responsibility falls under. Is their responsibility to insure the system on their end, or is it on your end? Typically, if you're buying it or financing it, this is going to be your responsibility. You might have to add that to your homeowner's insurance. So again, that's another cost that you then have to consider. Like, okay, now I have to pay this loan back. I have to pay an increased premium in my homeowner's insurance. Am I still saving money? Right. Also, prepayment. Is there a prepayment option? It's kind of similar to the buyout option, but you want to know, like a lot of people, you might run into some money later, or maybe you decide you just want to pay it off, right? So you want to know if you want a prepayment, how does that work? Any prepayment penalties, anything like that, right? So, and if you do prepay it, like, will they continue to provide you with maintenance coverage and so on, right? Because it might make sense to like prepay it and avoid paying some interest, but then you still want to make sure that the warranties that they promise you are still there. Real big thing, you want to get very familiar with solar incentives. If you are going to own or finance your system, you can be eligible for federal and state tax incentives. And these are pretty big. Right now, you cannot take advantage of these if you're doing the PPA or the lease, because you don't own the system. So the third-party provider who owns the system, they take advantage of the tax credits. And then in essence, in theory, they'll pass those, not entirely, but they should be able to be more competitive, right? Because they're getting an incentive from the government. But if you are going to buy them yourself, finance them so that you are the owner, as of now, the recording of this podcast in July 2021, you can get on the federal tax return up to a 26% tax credit. And on the state side, you have to check with your state. You may also have some tax incentives there as well to take advantage of. In 2020 through 22 is 26%. So let's say, for example, you bought a system that was $10,000, you can get $2,600 back in your tax return. In 2023, that goes down to 22%. And as of now, unless Congress extends it, it's designed to expire in 2024, the credit. So for now, unless Congress extends it, if you are thinking about solar, you definitely want to do it then no longer than 2023 if you decide to go forward. If you can do it in 2021 or 22, even better, because then you get the higher 26% back. Now, one thing I want to tell you about this credit, if you're listening to my podcast for a while, you might have heard me talk about refundable and non-refundable credits. And simply stated, a refundable credit is one where you would get money back from the government even if you didn't have any tax liability. For example, let's say you are getting a $2,000 credit and you only owed $1,000 to the government in taxes. The credit will offset the $1,000 you owe, and then you would still get the other $1,000 back. A non-refundable credit, you cannot get any money back beyond just bringing your tax liability to zero, right? So if you have a $1,000 tax liability and you have a $2,000 non-refundable credit, the $2,000 will be applied towards that $1,000, bring your liability to zero, but then you don't get the other $1,000. What you can do with the solar credit is that you get to carry it forward to future tax years and then use it up that way. So keep that in mind, because I actually remember one particular case where a client that was a retiree was in a situation where the tax liability was zero and they had solar panels. And unfortunately for them, from a tax standpoint, there was no benefit because the credit is non-refundable and there was nothing to offset. There was zero tax liability. So it just kept being forwarded year after year until one day, if he has any tax liability. So very important too, because a lot of times people do it and the tax credit is a huge decision for them to make, the decision to go forward. So if the tax credit isn't there, you still want to make sure that it makes sense from the other standpoint as far as like you saving money, right? So keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that this tax credit is for primary residents only. So you cannot claim that credit if you put in solar on an investment property. Just want to throw that out there. So If it's your primary residence, you live there, and you get solar and you finance it or own it, so no lease, no PPA, you can get a 26% federal tax credit. Also, some states offer their own tax credit incentives as well. So it could really help you offset a lot of the cost of this. So one thing I wanted to just briefly mention in terms of weighing the benefits of direct homeownership versus financing, it's the same thing as buying or leasing a car, right? So just think of it that way. If you're a homeowner who is financing through a lease or a PPA, you'll generally have fewer concerns about maintenance and operation of the system. And obviously, you want to confirm all of that in your contract. If you own it, then you own it, right? Just like you own a car. So you're required for all those maintenance and all that. Obviously, you still want to understand the warranty, because a lot of states want to have a minimum period, maybe like 5 years. And then you want to ask, is there an extended warranty that I can buy? Because it may make sense for you to actually do. So I wanted to give you just a couple of questions that might be helpful to ask when you're thinking about going solar, if you've already met with a provider. First of all, there's a lot of these companies out there, right? So you're not stuck with just one. If one of them happened to knock on your door, leave a flyer, they don't necessarily have a lock on a specific area. So they have competitors, right? So get a couple of quotes, just like when you're shopping around for a mortgage or when you're shopping around for financing on your car. Maybe talk to 2 or 3 of these solar installation companies. See what they have to say, right? So before you make the decision, get a couple of quotes. Ask them, will they install the system directly, or will they have somebody else install it, right? Another like subcontractor. So you want to ask these types of questions. How long have they been in business? Right? That's very important, because these tax credits are very lucrative for some companies. So, did they just create a company 2 years ago to take advantage of this, or have they been doing this for a while? Because you want to know about their track record. Make sure they have, obviously, other state certifications and licenses that may be required. One really big thing, I feel like, before you start going into all this stuff, talking about finances, how much you might save, I would ask for an on-site visit to be performed first to assess whether or not your house is actually viable for an electric system, for a solar electric system. Because if it isn't, then there's really no other conversation to be had. So just ask him, would you do an on-site visit? Just come check it out. Tell us if it's a viable site, right? So those are some of the questions you want to ask. From related to financing, you want to find out, can they help you, or at least give you some estimate, to calculate the payback and walk you through the contract and any assumptions within the contract, right? This is a standard thing. They should be able to have a standard contract that they use and be able to go through it and say, okay, here are some of the major clauses in our contract. So you know exactly what you're getting into. And again, it definitely doesn't hurt to have an attorney review these before you sign. Depending on your tax situation, you want to talk to your tax advisor. Does it make sense to own? You want to talk to your financial planner, because if you're deciding to finance, you want to figure out, where is this money going to come from? Or are you going to sell some of your investments to pay for this thing in cash? Does that make sense? So you want to talk to your financial planner, your tax preparer as well, to make sure that you're taking full advantage of the way that you're going to go about doing this based on your particular situation. You want to ask, what is the interest rate? What is the duration in years of the financing agreement? Which is why it's important to shop around, because you might get offered different financing packages. Is there a down payment, right? What are the options for down payments? Does it reduce my monthly payments? If I do, does it reduce the kilowatt per hour rate on a lease? Very important. A couple of questions related to operations of the solar electric system. You want to ask, who will perform the operations and the maintenance of the system? Because you definitely don't want to get stuck doing these if you thought they were, right? So you want to be clear about that before. Without a doubt, this is a really big one. How quickly do they respond to your request for help? You want to know that. Are there any charges for parts and labor? What services does the operation and maintenance contract cover, right? Because sometimes it might be like maintenance, but then you still have to pay for the part, things like that. Like, you want to be very clear on those. Like I mentioned before, is there a minimum production guarantee? You want to know what that is. What are the insurance requirements? Big one, right? Because if you have to insure it yourself, now you have to consider the cost of that when you're calculating if this makes sense. And who's responsible for the warranty system if there is one? Is the solar company? Will you receive a copy of the warranty agreement? These are really major ones. So, brief recap: you want to consider the solar system purchase or lease, et cetera, just like you would a car in a sense, because I feel like if you think about it that way, it actually may get a little less complicated from a general standpoint. So keep in mind that leases and the solar PPAs, the third-party developer is the one that buys them, owns them, and typically would take also take advantage of the federal investment tax credits. So you want to keep that in mind, whether, because when you direct purchase or do a loan, you as the homeowner buy it, own it, and take advantage of the tax credits. On the state tax credits, you still can take advantage of them, even if you're leasing it. But on the federal side, only as the purchaser, you take advantage of those credits. Responsible for operations, usually residential PPAs and solar leases, it's the third-party provider. Homeowners, it's usually going to be you. Right? Risk of damage, leases and PPAs, third-party developer. Risk of damage or destruction when you own it, that's on you. So again, big decision for you to make there. What happens if you sell the home, right? That you got to find out. The solar lease, the PPA, that depends on your contract. If you are the owner and you're financing it, it's possible that you may be able to transfer that, or you might have to pay it off first. Depending on your contract, right, for the finances. So these are pretty big questions that you definitely need to know before you sign on that dotted line, as they say. When you're financing, are the payments fixed? Is there a preset annual escalator? Things of that sort. What are the duration terms? You want to ask those things. What else? Does it require down payment, right? So this is just a quick little brief recap, because I know we touched on a lot of different points. Is there a minimum guarantee for a production guarantee on the contract? Are there escalator clauses in the contract? Big one. And finally, the insurance, right? Most of the time, if it's lease or residential PPA, they're going to take care of the insurance. You as the homeowner, if you buy it directly or via loan, you're going to be responsible for that. So there is solar in a nutshell for you. I'm not an expert in solar panels, but I did a little research to put this together for you guys, and I try to make it so that it's as simple and less complex as possible to at least have a really good general understanding, so that you can at least know what questions to ask and make an informed decision. So again, consult with your financial planner, your tax advisor, and your attorney before you sign on any dotted line for any things like this. And as always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, please send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. The information provided here is for information and education purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of myself, unless otherwise specifically cited. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations are made by my firm or myself about other parties' information or accuracy or completeness. All information or ideas provided should be discussed in detail with a financial advisor, accountant, or legal counsel prior to implementation. Thank you.